Good evening, all of you. Good evening, those of you who are here, especially those of you who are here and drove here. Yes, I see a few smiles as we mentioned that. Welcome to 2026 as well. I just got three little messages here. A reminder that next month, we're not actually sure of the full program of next month. Next month is our annual general meeting. And we usually try and have an item of interest. And at present, the item of interest is Queen's University Archives have been given all of the recordings, all of the videos that KWS television had when it was closed. And they have been slowly looking at them, organizing them. Mike Postovitz has been there putting all the sports ones. You remember Mike probably from his TV days, putting all the sports ones together. But they have an incredible history of Kingston over the past 25 years. And I'm sure in a lot of cases, you will appear in some of those. So the hope is that somebody from the archives will be able to be either present or in the archives and run the show from there and talk about the sort of things that are there. So that will be the Wednesday meeting next month. As you know, for the past 2 years, we have had a meeting during the Ontario Heritage Week, which has to be the worst chosen week of the year. Although looking at this week, maybe it won't be this year. The first year, we dutifully fought through about 3 foot of snow to get into City Hall. Last year, we gave up and canceled it for a week, and it was still not a great day. So we're going very brave this year and going 2 weeks later, because spring will be here by the last week of February. And that's when we're planning for the meeting this year. And it will be, we've got a speaker and we've got a topic. Dr. Joel Conrad, who's with the City Heritage Department, has led a group on what heritage means in the future in Kingston. And you can, if you are very clever, you'll be able to find it online on the city website. But it has some interesting parts to it. And so we've invited him along. We just don't have a date for sure yet, but we'll let you know as soon as we can. And the only other announcement I have is my regular February one. Who's paid? And if you haven't, tonight is the night. As soon as the meeting is over, you can pay online. You don't have to go out in the snow or anything at all like that. And Pete again will be a far happier person tomorrow when he looks at the account and sees that you've all been so good. So welcome, Duncan. It's all yours.
Thank you, Peter, and welcome to our first lecture of 2026. Might begin with a little poll. How many of you think January is your favorite month? Hands up. We have a few deviants here, but thank you for coming anyway. Our theme tonight is community. Now, when you think about it, community is constructed at various levels. When we Canadians are out of the country and are asked what our community is, we say Canada. When we're in Canada, we tell people we're Ontarians. When we're in Ontario, we tell people we're Kingstonians. And when we're in Kingston, we tell people we're from Redendale or Berryfield or Grenville Park. So on each one of those levels, we construct an identity, a history, and familiarity with kind of the apparatus that makes our life possible at each one of those levels. Our guest tonight, Professor Dave Gordon from Queen's, is a historian of community. He has been a professor of geography and planning at Queen's for many years and also affiliated with Queen's School of Urban and Regional Studies, where he was director for many, many years. He has specialized in the history of planning, and you may recall he spoke to us some years ago of the urban renewal movement of the 1960s that is still with us, or the evidence of it is still with us downtown. So he's a historian of that. He's a historian of how communities are designed and planned. When he last spoke to us, and I direct your attention to the Historic Kingston, which published his article, but that is amongst many publications. He has been a prolific scholar. I'll draw your attention to one book that I think is particularly fascinating, and that is his history of how 20th century capital cities are planned and have been planned. That book, believe it or not, has been translated into Chinese. So somebody in China is watching, and that's from an author's point of view, what a great market to break into. He has also carried his expertise abroad and has taken up visiting professorships as far away as Australia and Latvia. He's joined tonight by a colleague, Chloe Michaud, who's with us on Zoom, who is a master's graduate from Queen's in planning and is now the town planner for the township of Montague, north of Kingston, around Smith Falls, as you probably know. She, with David, is the co-author of an upcoming article in the Urban History Review. So, David, welcome. We look forward to what you have to say.
Thank you, Duncan. And this is the point at which you say, oh, I'm really happy to be here tonight. And it's not that bad out. Those high school and elementary school teachers who cancel classes 6 days in a row, they're real whips. At Queen's, we never cancel a class for bad weather. I remember as an undergraduate, one of my professors skiing in cross country from Sydenham because the roads were closed.
Okay.
So this is Chloe Michaud's master's report. Chloe did much of the research on this. We spent a lot of time, fun time together in the archives of Queen's University. And in the decades that followed World War II, Canadian cities embarked on ambitious urban renewal programs inspired by modernist ideals that sought to excise blight and replace aging neighborhoods with gleaming high-density housing. In Toronto, the Regent Park project raised entire blocks of Hugh Garner's Cabbagetown for apartment blocks. In Halifax, Africville's tiny wooden cottages were bulldozed and its predominantly Black community relocated. Yet in Kingston, a mid-sized city nestled on Lake Ontario's northern shore, a different story unfolded in Rideau Heights neighborhood. Here, municipal planners adopted what Patrick Geddes called conservative surgery, preserving as many sound homes as possible and re-subdividing serviced lots, stitching new housing into the fabric rather than uprooting the whole community. So this presentation traces Rideau Heights from its origins as a self-help settlement on farmland sold by a local philanthropist, through its annexation by the City of Kingston in 1952, to the many urban renewal plans that follow to reshape its city streets between 57 and 66. Unlike the wholesale clear and rebuild programs seen in most other cities, Rideau Heights renewal were involved in response to rising costs, legal challenges, and the steadfast attachment of the residents to their homes. Today's modest bungalows and manicured lawns in the area, neatly paved streets, remain with just a few echoes of the original tar paper shacks that Chloe was able to identify, reminding us that renewal need not erase the history to improve living conditions. Now, there's a version of this that's going to come out in Historic Kingston that's full of facts and references and statistics and tables. But this presentation is mostly going to be pictures because I'm an urban planner and urban designer. And Peter Gower wouldn't let me put 100 images in a Historic Kingston article. So you get to see some of the fun stuff that we dug up. So this is this area, Rideau Heights. It's the area north of the railway, north of Weller Avenue. And the urban renewal area was in this area that was shaded.
401.
So south of the 401 and
Yeah,
north of the railway.
401 at the top.
And this is A.E. Weller. Weller Avenue is named after him. He was a local businessman, an alderman, and a land developer, but he was also a philanthropist. We're told in his wig obituary, he was a staunch liberal, congregant of St. George's Anglican Cathedral. And he bought Rideau Heights, the farm lots, in about 1900. And during the 1930s Depression and the 1940s wartime and post-war era, he sold many of the lots at a very low price, practically nothing, if there was someone who needed a place to build a house. So this allowed many low-income families to build homes. And he sold some lots to homeless veterans after World War II. And there's stories about him doing the deals on paper napkins and selling lots for $10 to people who wanted to build. And you could do that in this area prior to 1952 because this was the Wild West. It was Kingston Township. There were no rules. You could do whatever you wanted. So this was Rideau Heights in the 1940s and 50s, an air photo from the archives. And you can see the mud streets. There was sort of a grid laid out. There's Weller Avenue, which was just barely graveled, and the rest of the streets there in here were just mud tracks through the area, but there was a grid laid out like this, and lots, you can see people building houses in the dirt around the site. Okay. Here's another aerial photograph showing Montreal Street down at the bottom. And here's what it looked like on the ground in 1958. Now, that's a dirt street. There was no water service, no no sewers. Hydro was in the, you can see a few poles, and a few of the houses had electricity, but not all. And then in 1952, the area, Rideau Heights area, was annexed. And as was all the rest of the olive colored area out to the Little Cat. It was annexed from Kingston Township. There was much screaming and yelling and a big fight. But Kingston's boundaries were extended, and suddenly Rideau Heights was part of the City of Kingston, the responsibility of the City of Kingston. And a local pastor, Reverend Good, from the Anglican Church downtown St. Paul's, visited this, and he got a front page article in the Whig saying Kingston had appalling slums now, worse than any in Canada, he thought, and the city should do something about it. So these were the kind of pictures that were available at the time. And the mayor said, "Nah, we can't do anything about it." That was the next day. But then the MPP, Nickel, member of parliament, said, well, actually, there's a federal program called Urban Renewal that we can get some money to help do this. And the mayor said, no, we don't want to spend any money on stuff like this. These were the days, with the exception of Mayor Curtis, I gave a talk about a few years ago, where you got elected to city council and became mayor by promising to cut taxes and cut services and not spend any money on foolish things like sewer and water and roads and a sewage treatment plant. And so, we'll just continue to dump the sewage into the river. That was the mayor that said you can't do anything about slums, tried to cancel the sewage treatment plant. There was an opportunity to get some federal money, though, to do this and to look about it. Now, this idea of urban renewal came from Europe, the turn of the 20th century. Famously, Patrick Geddes, who was a biologist, ecologist, planner, who worked out of Edinburgh. If you've ever been to Edinburgh and you've been to the castle, near the castle was the Outlook Tower, which was his observatory of the city, and it had a big exhibition in there about how Edinburgh could be made better. And he believed in stitching new housing into the urban fabric and preserving sound homes. He called this conservative surgery, which he suggested for India. He did this in India and suggested it for Scotland. The French had a different idea. The modernist architecture movement of the 1920s to 1980s, this is Le Corbusier, the famous French-Swiss architect, and showing his design, universal design for how people should live in the future in these medium-rise slabs. And so the Congress for the Internationale for the Architecture Moderne, CIAM, recommended urban renewal with slum clearance. And the CIAM's position was that the older cities were obsolete and that they needed to be torn down. You needed what they called the tabula rasa, take everything out and design everything fresh and new and modern, as efficient as possible. And here's their proposal, which was a exhibit at a World's Fair in Paris for what needed to be done for central Paris. So, whoops, back up. So, as a sop to those crazy heritage people, they would keep Notre Dame, but everything else would be knocked down, including the Louvre. So this is the Paris, and there'll be some expressways so that you can get in and out at 100 kilometers an hour. And there'll be high-rise office buildings and these mid-rise slabs covering the whole of central Paris. Anybody been to this area? Do you think this is a good idea? The French weren't stupid and would let him do this sort of thing. But his ideas were very, very powerful. And after World War II, the CIAM architects were in charge of all the architecture and planning schools in the world. And these ideas became absolute orthodoxy. There was the only thing that was taught. Everybody thought it was the right thing to do. And it seemed like the right thing to do after the cities have been, central of cities in Europe had been bombed and needed to be rebuilt. And the Swedish were so jealous that they didn't have a chance to rebuild a bombed area that they tore down they blew up most of their central city and rebuilt it with slabs like this. And all across North America, the United States and Canada, there were proposals to do things like this. So pre-World War II in Canada, there was very little government involvement in housing. It was all to be done by the private sector. And post-World War II, this is Clifford Curtis, who we gave a talk about a couple of years ago. He was the chief advisor to the federal government on the reconstruction of the country after World War II. Professor Curtis from the economics department at Queen's with a committee said that we got a big problem. We got a million veterans. The country is 11 million people. We got a million veterans who are going to be returning after many years away. My grandfather was away for 6 years, 6.5 years, for example. And when they come back, the main thing that they wanted was to have a new house and a chance at a university education. So the federal government said, we need a program to build 1 million new homes fast in 10 years. And they said also, we need to clean up the slum housing in parts of Canada, in the cities. There hadn't been much new housing built for 20 years because of the Depression and the war, except for wartime housing, which we've heard all about from John Grenville here. But there was a backlog of houses, wooden houses, typically built early in the 1900s. Greenwood, they're 50 years old and they're falling apart. And they were terrible places to live. Less than half of the people in many parts of Canada had bathrooms in their homes. If you can imagine living in a big city with an outhouse and a well, bad idea. So there was a lot of that going on. This was the first urban renewal project. This was something Corbusier would have been proud of. A chunk of Cabbagetown in Toronto was torn down And these apartment buildings were built in their place, called Regent Park. Seemed like a great idea at the time. And it did work well for about 20 or 30 years, and then it became a big problem. And that's the way urban renewal was thought of in most places. And something you do something in the near the center of the city, take up an area of poor housing conditions, tear it all down, and close off the roads and build new apartments or townhouses for people who lived there before. Now, one of the people who preached this was a man called Gordon Stevenson. And Gordon Stevenson was from Liverpool, and he was as an architecture degree from Liverpool, and he studied at the Institut d'Urbanisme in Paris and worked in Le Corbusier's studio for 2 years in the 30s. Then he did a degree at MIT, the world's best planning school. And this was a highly respected practitioner and teacher. He designed the first new town built after the war in Britain, for example. But he spoke with a really thick Liverpudlian accent. He sounded like one of the Beatles when they were trying not to sound American, right? And in Britain, that was a death knell for you in 1950, because it identified you as, his father had been a policeman and a unionist, and it identified you as a member of the working class. And although he rose to be the head of the Liverpool Planning School, which was the second best school in Britain at the time, he was never going to get further. So he thought that he would emigrate to, he was offered the headship of MIT's planning school, which is the best school in the world, and the architecture school. And he was going to come to America. But he was a Red. So in the 30s and just after the war, when Russia was our friend, he'd spent time in the Soviet Union. And he was trying to emigrate into the United States, even though he had an American wife and an American degree during McCarthyism. And he couldn't get in. He spent 5 years in Toronto trying to get his visa approved. And during that time, he was offered, Toronto wasn't stupid, they snatched him up to be head of their planning program. And during that time, he did urban renewal studies, because he knew how to do them, for Halifax and Kingston and London and Ottawa, campus planning for the. So Kingston had one of the great urban planners in the world working on the studies, the initial studies for this. So Stevenson worked on Halifax just before he came here, and he did a study of planning all of Halifax that infamously suggested that the housing in really poor condition on the north end, where the Black Nova Scotians lived, be removed, and that they all be moved into a brand new public housing project with schools and community centers close to work. And at the time in the 1950s, they thought that was educated people thought this was just a great idea. These are people who are having trouble finding jobs, living in shacks, self-built. They happened to own them, which was very unusual for Black families in Nova Scotia, living in shacks, and we're going to give them a brand new townhouse close to downtown in a public housing project. Sounded good to the planners involved, but the people in Africville didn't want to move. What they wanted was water and sewer, which they didn't have, unlike everybody else in Halifax. But urban renewal happened to them anyway, and their houses were torn down to make the bridge, McDonald Bridge approaches, and they were moved into a public housing project. So that's the background and what was proposed just before Stevenson came to Kingston. When he came to Kingston, he ran into this fellow. People remember George Muirhead? I do. Wonderful guy. And he had a heart of gold, very interested in better living conditions for people. He had a master's of social work from Toronto, and one of the first planning degrees from U of T just before Stevenson arrived. And he was hired to be the planning officer for the City of Kingston to do something about urban renewal for here. And George will tell us later how he stumbled across the opportunity to bring Stevenson in. And the two of them were the co-authors of this plan, the 1960 Planning Study of Kingston, which is the most influential report that's ever been written about shaping our city. I've given a presentation about this about 4 years ago about how it changed my neighborhood, Sydenham Ward, in the downtown. So George worked on this in the 50s until 62 when City Council made life difficult for him. So he went away, was head of planning for Etobicoke, and when council recognized what a bad mistake they had, they brought him back as director of planning and urban renewal from 1970 to 1980. And he gave me my second job as a planner. I worked summer job for him. Great fellow, co-founder of the Frontenac Heritage Foundation. I know he was a member of the Kingston Historical Society. I was to see him here and at the Heritage Foundation. So here's the study that they did, the planning study for Kingston. They started before Stevenson arrived. To do an urban renewal study, you need to check the condition of the housing in the area that you're concerned about. So you do a very thorough survey of it. You photograph every house, you visit every house, you check their condition, physical conditions. That was done in 57, just before Stevenson arrived. They did the work from 57 to 60, and published the report and gave it to council. Then the next thing that happened was a new public housing project was built in Riverview Court, it's called. So that's off Montreal Street, just beside Rideau Heights. And the Rideau Heights plan, a detailed plan, came out in 62 and was revised in 63 and subdivided in 66, and they moved forward. So that's the fast version. I'm going to walk you through it now. So the condition of building survey, this is something Chloe and I found in the archives. We unfolded this map, and you could see the blacker the dot, the worse the condition of the house. Oh. So most of the houses were in poor condition. But there were some that were in decent condition. The ones that were built under the Veterans Housing Program, they had advice on building. You had to build something that was sound for that. But a lot of the housing looked like that. Or that. Or that. That one's not too bad. Collectively, it looked like that. Or that. That. Yes, that is tar paper. And all, concrete block foundations. There was a family living in that shed with the abandoned cars. Here's a house that was in pretty good condition, built. We think this was one of the veterans' housing ones. See how the snow is banked up along the bottom here? That's to keep the wind out. Because the houses were full of cracks. That's tar paper over a wood shack. So do you see where Reverend Good was coming from? You're walking around and looking at this. Here's an example that was actually in the report, 1957. So this is, we think, this is the social worker and planner, Marion. It'll come back to me in a second. And she's doing the survey of this, and this is a tar paper shack, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kids, mostly in bare feet. And inside the shack, there's a dirt floor, and the tar paper doesn't even cover the boards on the outside. And here's an outhouse, and beside it, a pump, which is a really good way for your kids to get typhoid. Here's another example. They use, so you can see the self-built basement and the house, different types of scrap wood and tar paper over the outside, the kids playing outside bare feet, and once again, an outhouse and the barrel for the water pump beside it. Really unhealthy living conditions. So Stevenson and Muirhead, their first plan was tear it all down. There's so many houses in poor condition that you might as well tear them all down, build some townhouses like Regent Park South here, and some existing houses, or build some new single detached houses on a nice modern cul-de-sac here, and keep Weller Avenue and this, and close all the other streets in the grid. So that was the original idea, but that was going to involve demolishing a lot of houses, including a lot that were only in, moderately bad condition, and some that were in good condition. And instead of building the townhouses on the site where all the houses that were in moderate condition, they went to the farm field just across Montreal Street and built Riverview Court there. So there was an open field there. The city bought it and built townhouses for people from Rideau Heights to be relocated into. So you had the offer to move out of your tar paper shack and move into a brand new townhouse in the modern public housing. Very few people wanted to do it. There was a tremendous housing shortage at the time. A lot of people wanted to move in here. But the people who lived in Rideau Heights had built the houses with their own hands, and they owned their house. So they weren't crazy about becoming a renter in a public housing project, even if the rent was connected to your income. If your income's zero, your rent's zero. Even that deal wasn't attractive to a lot of people who loved the idea of owning their own home and building their own home. But the conditions were so bad that City Council insisted that the really poor housing conditions, the ones that were unhealthy to live in, be knocked down. And some of the people there moved into Riverview Court, but others went and bought lots elsewhere in Kingston Township and built again. So this was the second plan, where they said, okay, let's try and keep some of these streets, turn them into nice modern crescents. See, the dark buildings here are the ones that are in good condition, and see how many, we play with the lots carefully, see how many of the houses in good condition we can keep. Because not only did the residents not want to move out, the city didn't want to spend any money on this. So the mayor was still, yeah, I know there's 90% federal dollars, but it's still going to cost us, $50,000 to do this, and we don't want to waste our money on this sort of thing. So they were trying to do this for the least amount of money possible. So by 62, they were thinking, okay, 57 houses out of the original 94 should be removed because they're in terrible shape. And they provided more sites for schools just outside. So Rideau Heights and I've forgotten the Catholic school. What's the name of the Catholic school? Yeah, Holy Family. They got a site just outside the urban renewal thing, so you didn't have to tear down people's houses to provide a school site. And they converted the streets and put water and sewer in and paved them. And they made options for people who preferred the subsidized housing, so you could move into Riverview Court if you wanted to. And the lots that Weller had done were pretty big because land was free and you had to put water and sewer. Well, houses were built all different positions in the lots because there were no rules. So they were trying to make new lots in a way that kept as many of the old houses as possible, but freed up a whole bunch of new lots because there's water and sewer. They can sell those lots and other people can build houses there, which is how they were going to pay for the whole thing. So that was the plan. So it'd be a whole bunch of new serviced lots that were smaller than the big ones that Weller did. And some of the people who owned the big lots and had houses that weren't too bad, their lot was split in half, and they got to be water and sewer, and the other was lot. So it was revised again. They were actually looking at moving a few of the houses that were in good condition so they could have more lots out of it. So this was very unusual, the idea that A, you'd keep anything at all, and B, that you'd move a house. In the end, they never moved any houses. They were only going to move about half a dozen, and it turned out that the money they were going to make by selling the extra lots was less than the cost of moving the house. So they just left it with a slightly larger lot. So in the end, there's the final subdivision plan these are all the new lots that were created. And they extended the Riverview Court again to provide more affordable housing nearby. And the land a little just off to the south became the famous Headway project with more social housing. And these were shown as high-rise buildings for seniors, but became medium-rise buildings for seniors. So a lot of social housing was added to the area. But the Rideau Heights urban renewal area itself, and this is what it looked like by 1970 with all the lots sold and new houses built on it, just looks, if you don't know there was an urban renewal area, you would never guess that was the spot, because it just looks like a regular Kingston subdivision. Now, some of the new lots were bought by the Ontario Housing Corporation, which built single and semi-detached houses for a form of public housing that was scattered around for families. Again, there's less stigma attached when you do that. And most of the other lots were just sold to people who wanted to build a house. So Chloe went out and with the data we knew about the houses that were going to be kept, and went out and tried to find them. And it was really hard. But she found where, some the original houses that were still there, but you had to look really carefully. So this is Wilson Street, for example. We're using the magic of Google Street View. So can you see the urban renewal area, the urban renewal house? Well, that's what it looked like. That was one of the ones in good condition. That's what it looks like today. If you look very carefully, see where the door is and the two windows on either side? There it is. So somebody's put a second floor in, lifted the roof, put a garage on the side, put brick out the front, enclosed the balcony, enclosed the porch, and we got kind of that's not quite a normal suburban house, but you wouldn't guess that. So there was, before some of the other churches were built, there was a stucco little place of worship on Drennan Street. There it is today. It's 94 Weller Avenue. There was a little store, and it's a house now. Now, these look a little awkward, but when you see there, you can see it's just a bungalow on either side. So you look down the street, you see this, and that one is the original house. So that's what it looked like today from the air. And actually, strangely enough, the urban renewal area has one of the highest amount of home ownership in the area, because everybody owns their house. It's the areas around it where the public housing projects are, where people don't own their own homes. So it's a very strange urban renewal project compared to, say, Regent Park, right? for Africville. So to conclude, Rideau Heights challenges the view that urban renewal requires wholesale destruction of a community. It was, well, Patrick Geddes would have called this conservative surgery, removing the worst, and you saw some very bad quality housing, preserving the rest, and augmenting services. It offered a humane, cost-effective template for neighborhood improvement long before these principles became mainstream. In the words of a 1969 federal task force, if public designations are necessary at all, they should be more carefully defined to cover the dwellings or groups of dwellings which are really at issue. By both accident and design, Kingston's planners took that admonition to heart, crafting neighborhood renewal that minimized interventions, safeguarded community, and left tangible, but barely visible, echoes of the history in every street. This became a precedent for a new way of neighborhood improvement. It was called the Neighborhood Improvement Program that was developed in the 70s. And if you live in the McBurney Park area, that was the idea there, that they did careful cutting and stitching and improving of the houses to make the neighborhood less of a problem with physical problems and leave it as much intact as possible. So this was a forerunner for this new approach. Urban renewal became incredibly unpopular across Canada and was canceled in 1970 because of slum clearance projects like Africville. And I was taught urban renewal was absolute evil in urban planning. And I taught urban renewal as absolute evil for the first 10 years or so before I became a better historian. I used to tour people around my neighborhood in Sydenham ward, complaining that, first of all, Gordon Stevenson was educated by Le Corbusier. Secondly, he's doing urban renewal in my neighborhood. He's going to knock my house down, which is a solid brick 1918 house. So my house was to be knocked down and done. The trick was, and he was proposing in Sydenham ward, and we gave a talk about this 5 years ago, to knock down half the houses in Old Sydenham ward. And that would have been terrible. But the miracle of it was that somebody educated by Le Corbusier suggested keeping anything at all. And Stevenson, who was absolutely a modernist architect and did some very destructive things to the heritage of Perth, Australia, for which he's not loved, where he moved afterwards. He wrote about how Kingston's peculiar combination of old buildings in fairly good condition, they didn't have a word for it back then in the 50s. But he was recommending that the parts of Old Sydenham ward be preserved. So this was, in fact, I was too stupid to notice it at first, the first heritage conservation district study in Canada. Completely by accident. We're only going to tear half of it down. So glass is half full. And that's really a difference. And then that got me interested in what they did up here in Rideau Heights. And again, it wasn't tear it all down. And it was cut, stitch, move some houses, take the worst out, and make it seamlessly integrated in the future. And this really changed George Muirhead's way of thinking about these things, because he started out thinking like this. He was brought in to do urban renewal like Regent Park up here. By the time he was finished working with Stevenson, George was thinking, maybe it's not such a bad idea to conserve some of the heritage of Kingston. Because at the time in the 50s, if you may recall, there was a crack in the portico of Kingston City Hall. And rather than fix it, the City Council tore the portico and its hard carved columns off, smashed it into gravel, used it for roads, with the council saying it's the first good thing that old building ever did for the city. And there was a big triangular hole in the front of the building that Stevenson saw for the first time, filled with gray plywood. And that became a centennial project to rebuild the city hall. And gradually, and this is another story for another time, there became an interest in preserving the heritage of Kingston, which was a very important part of what the Kingston did. And George led the foundation of the Frontenac Heritage Foundation and wrote part of the act, the first Heritage Preservation Act for Ontario. So this was a very, very important thing in the City of Kingston's policy until about 2 years ago. This project here in Rideau Heights and the other urban renewal study in Sydenham Ward, they were where new things were experimented with, new ways of doing it. And it's very unusual that a famous international planner was working on our city and helped change its trajectory. So I'm happy to take questions, and Chloe is here online too, and she'll be happy to take questions. And we have George Muirhead here too, if you'd like him to answer some questions about Rideau Heights.
Thank you very much, David. Wonderful lecture. Wonderful in the sense that it enriches our experience as Kingston citizens. And now we can drive in our cars and look out the window and see a neighborhood and say, hey, did you know? That's what this kind of history does. It brings our community together. Now, David would like to questions, and the protocol here is if you're in the room, please raise your hand. I'll bring this to you so we can all hear it. And those of you out in Zoom land, if you have a question, or if Chloe would like to add something, by all means, please do. Paul here will spot your question and draw it to my attention. So any questions in the room? Let me perhaps give you one. Is in the background of all of this, is there something economic lurking, Keynesian economics? The last slide you showed us said this is sponsored by the Ontario government and the federal government of Canada. CMHC was always seen as a way to prime the pump. People would go out and buy lumber, cement, etc. Perhaps the best example is E.P. Taylor starting Argus Corporation and Don Mills and all the spin-offs that got. And the bottom line here was, let's not go back to depression.
All of this was very much planned by the federal government as part of after World War I, the Roaring '20s didn't start for a while. It was terrible in Canada when the veterans returned. There was a terrible pandemic, influenza, and lots of people died. There were no jobs. There were riots, strikes. There was no thought about how the country would recover from the war. So Professor Curtis worked on the housing issue. And it's astonishing, very, very rare that you read a government study done by a professor and a bunch of experts, and almost every single thing in the report is implemented almost instantly. So this was all planned as part of the reconstruction of the country. Was led by C.D. Howe, the Minister of Everything. So the wartime industries were converted to create jobs, and housing was built in huge quantities to provide this. And the Canadian economy soared after the war in the 1950s, one of the best times ever. So while this was going on, we had the federal government pouring money into housing and urban renewal, and the economy soaring, and lots of employment. So that definitely helped. Yes.
And I think all of us are struck by the fact that our government now, Mr. Carney's government, is trying to evoke that same spirit. You've probably seen the ads on the television of the building in St. Lawrence Seaway, houses such as we've heard tonight. History can repeat itself in this sense. Questions?
We should all say thank you. There's Chloe has come up. We should give her a hand. This was her research that was really wonderful. And Lauren Breen is somewhere online too. Lauren helped make the presentation, which I hope entertained you.
Oh, you'd like to add anything to tonight's our presentation tonight?
What was the most interesting thing you found?
Oh, can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can.
Yeah, awesome. Well, there was a ton. I spent a lot of time in my final year of my master's digging through boxes in the archives, and it was really enjoyable. But the most interesting thing I found probably was the before and after photos that Dave showed you. I think like that first one that he had showed you, there were many houses in the neighborhood that really to an untrained eye you would never know that they had been built before an urban renewal program had gone into the neighborhood. So I think being able to identify all of those houses was really interesting to me, especially when many urban renewal projects throughout Canada and the United States had been raise the entire neighborhood and build something new. So to be able to see really just how different Rideau Heights was compared to those, and see those relics of the time before Rideau Heights had been subject to that project, that was really interesting and really fun. It was kind of like a scavenger hunt of sorts.
Let me ask you, one of the things came out of Dave's talk is the importance of culture, that people get used to the culture of their neighborhood. And one of the problems perhaps planners have is they're too rational. They sit at their drawing board and they, like Le Corbusier, plan buildings, forgetting that the people who are already on the ground have developed a rootedness into that community. And Africville was a good example of that. Did you find that?
That the planners at the time had that sort of idea as well, that community was important.
Well, Dave used the word resistance. They encountered resistance from
Right.
the people who live there, even though outhouse. They saw it as their home, their ownership, their piece of land.
Yes, definitely. And even digging through newspaper articles, that was a large part of my research, was going through old Whig articles and kind of just seeing how the project had gone throughout the years. And something that was kind of unique at the time is that after that initial 1962 plan came out for the urban renewal of the neighborhood, a planning meeting was held in the community, which was not required at the time and was very abnormal. Many planners wouldn't have even bothered to do that. But George Muirhead and his team, they went out and did that. And they got a lot of good feedback for it, but there was also some resistance to it as well. But I think something that was unique at the time is that they actually took that feedback and worked it into their plan. So as Dave had mentioned, there was a lot of changes that happened from that first initial 1960s plan to ultimately what became, the 1966 plan of subdivision. And one of those was, economics, trying to make lots cheaper for people who were going to purchase them, but then also to make it cheaper for the municipality, because there was cost sharing involved. Federal government was going to cover, I think, 50%, and the province would take 25%, but the municipality was still on the hook for 25% of it. And that was to the tune of what would be today about $700,000. And in a council that doesn't want to, wants to pinch pennies, and that wasn't very popular to spend a ton of money. So, excuse me, part of that was to make it, more economical. But the third one was to really integrate what people were saying and their opinions about what they wanted the neighborhood to look like and what they wanted that plan to look like. So definitely, I think there was a lot of community involvement that wasn't very normal at the time. And the planners really did seem to take an interest in the well-being of the community and kind of have a more reciprocal relationship rather than a paternalistic, this is the plan and this is what happens. So I did find that for sure.
Thank you.
It was very unusual to find an article in the Whig Standard in one of the later public meetings where the reporter was kind of stunned, and we read the planner's memo before they were going to the meeting. They were afraid they were going to be beaten up again, and then the meeting went, and the community, after the change has been made, actually said nice things about the plan and the planner. The reporters going, we've never seen a public meeting where people voted in favor of the plan that was coming. Seems to be kind of unusual these days too.
Any questions? And out in Zoom land?
Anyone want to hear what George has to say?
Yeah. Would you like to listen for a few minutes? Because George is out there in the internet. I'll let you conduct this.
Kind of cool. Kind of cool to hear it from George's mouth himself. We're very happy that we got him on tape while he was still with us a few years ago. So happy to take any other questions that you might have.
Dave, one last question. Would you agree that one of our problems with housing in the nation today is that this smooth relationship between federal, provincial, and municipal government, which you described as policy planning goes up and down and money comes up, and is not there now? There's frictions that keep them from this kind of productive remaking of our housing stock.
I think many of the problems we have come from the period where we simply stopped investing in housing for people of minimum means. So we did a lot of this building of public housing and cooperative housing and nonprofit housing in the 1950s, 60s, 70s. And it all came to a halt in the late 80s. And we're 40 years worth of backlog. There just hasn't been housing built for people, low-income families or low-income folks, for a long, long time. And we're just starting to build some more of that. The net effect of this has been that across the country, there just simply isn't enough social housing. And the waiting lists go on forever. And people who fall off the list at the bottom end, we have a homelessness problem. And it's directly related to the private sector is not going to build housing for people with no income. We have to do this collectively. We were willing to do it in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and into the 80s. We're starting to do it a little bit now, but we're going to have to get really serious about it in the years ahead. In many ways, the shacks of Rideau Heights are kind of the homeless encampment today.
Thank you very much. One of the joys of research is that your subject connects with things that pass by the door right now. And I suspect that's very true for Chloe, who's now working in this area and seeing some of the things in her research in her day-to-day life, but yet facing new things. So good luck to you, Chloe, and thank you very much. And Dave, thank you very much on behalf of the society. We'd like you to go out and buy a snow shovel.
Yes.
Thank you all for coming. Our next lecture is on the 18th of March, on a Wednesday, when Jake Bredman, a doctoral student in history at Queen's, will be here to talk about his research in the renovation of the Bellevue House Museum. he will talk about all the people who were related with that house, not just Sir John, but kind of a social history of Bellevue House. So that's March 18th. We'll look forward to seeing you then. Thanks for coming.